English translation, 215th contact, Saturday, 28th of February, 1987, 0209 hours.
My first question today refers to the massacre of the Palestinian refugees in Sabra and Chatila in the year 1982. We already talked about this once, but on the one hand, nothing was held in writing in relation to this, and on the other hand, your answer was not sufficient enough. The events were horrifying, with which more than 3,000 human beings were brutally and bestially murdered on the 15th or 16th of September 1982. In addition, it was never determined as to who the real ringleaders, respectively main perpetrators, actually were who gave the order for this massacre. Can you now say this clearly and plainly? I mean, who the main responsible person was, or who the main responsible persons were?
There were 468 human beings who lost their lives in the massacres. There were two real culprits, namely the Israeli Prime Minister at that time, Menachem Begin, and the Defense Minister, Ariel Sharon. Together, these two secretly decided upon the massacre, which Ariel Sharon then arranged with the Christian militias, respectively the responsible persons of Gamal's phalangists, with the promise that the Israeli occupation troops would not intervene, following which the murderous militias could then freely enter the refugee camps and carry out their atrocities. Also with them were members of Haddad's army, who could likewise pass through the Israeli controls without difficulty and invade the camps of Sabra and Chatila and carry out their murderous work. Begin's and Sharon's secret agreement with the leaders of the Christian killer brigades never became known, because all those who were responsible have remained silent to this day, and of course they will continue to do so. But with what happened in the year 1982, it will not be enough, because Ariel Sharon, who thinks the Palestinians look better dead than alive, will not halt his murderous deeds. This will especially be so when he arrives at the highest power in Israel, by being proclaimed the head of state in the year 2001. As I have already explained to you, he is an unusually aggressive man and a Palestinian hater, as well as a murderous element that does not shy away from any atrocities, as this is also true of Begin. When Sharon arrives at great power, very much distress will come over Israel and its inhabitants, as well as over the Palestinians, because through his direct command, many open and secret service murders will happen. Through him, Israel will ignore and stomp on all liberties and human rights of the Palestinians more and more, as well as overthrow all political and human rights and rules, and spread and arrange murderous terror with enormous destruction. Through Ariel Sharon, very much disaster, evil and pain, suffering and death will be spread in the new millennium because he will be able to indulge uninhibitedly in his murderous and inhumane ambitions, in utter irresponsibility, and in uncontrollable hatred against the Palestinians in particular, and also against the Arabs, without any great and serious objection being raised against it by the Israelis or by the world. Nevertheless, if such occurs, then it will only be lax and dishonest. Ariel Sharon's actions will occur to the same extent as those of the Americans who, under the guise of the fight against terrorism and the preservation of peace, will run on the same tracks with their global military interventions in the affairs of foreign countries. However, both actions will be the same, so both Israel's and America's, namely of a terrorist, respectively counter-terrorist nature, as this will also be the case with the Palestinians and with Iraq, as well as other countries, so also with a variety of distinct terrorist organizations, including those that are secretly driven by the state and those of the secret services of the state.
There, the world can look forward to and prepare for a lot of misery, murder and mayhem, suffering, destruction, hatred and vindictiveness, as well as many other evils.
That is correct, for that will actually be the case.
Then to something else. For now, I have once again heard of enough evil that the future will bring. How does it stand then with the progress relating to genetic engineering? You have already told me a few things, but now, in relation to this, the question arose in our group during a discussion. When will it have come so far that genetic science will merge plant and animal genes together in order to cultivate plant animals, respectively animal plants? Do you have any knowledge about this, and does such an action represent the natural scientific evolution of man?
The science of genetic engineering is established in the laws of overall evolution. Therefore, it also cannot be prevented, even though in the future, irrational ones, who will unite together in whole organizations, will want to destroy such progress by all unfair means, even with lies and with false test reports and impact reports on genetically altered plants, animals, and humans. However, genetic progress cannot be stopped. In spite of all these irrational machinations of the genetic engineering enemies, because the laws of evolution will allow it that even this branch of progress will find its fulfillment through human genius. Of course, genetic engineering will need its time before it can function flawlessly, because every beginning requires efforts, researches, and mistakes that must be made, for only through these can qualified and real successes be obtained and progress be created. But exactly this means that all negating things that will be undertaken in the future by those who are irrational and fearful, in reference to genetic engineering and, thus, to genetic manipulations in plants, animals, and humans, will be wrong and impeding to progress, as well as absurd, unrealistic, stupid, and irresponsible, for such actions will inhibit the progress and the better well-being of the Earth human being and will slow down many vitally necessary solutions for humans and plants and even make such solutions impossible. Due to the irrationality and irresponsibility of the genetic opponents, it will be that a lot of genetic progress for all humans, animals, and plants, as well as waters and air, and even for all of nature, will be prevented for many years, even though life could be prolonged by centuries through genetic engineering and just through the genetic manipulation of the person, by which means his or her health could be so stabilized, namely in a few decades, that they would almost never get sick. Also plants, fruits, and vegetables, as well as other food products, could already be so genetically altered in a short time for the welfare of humans that ample benefits would arise from it. But the irresponsible, irrational, and, thus, the gene-negating ones will work against this with lies, deceit, and fear, by which means the actual successes of genetic engineering will also have to wait a long time for themselves, for when the first actual successes are achieved, from which the human beings will benefit, often not even knowing that their food or medicines are genetically engineered and are only actually useful and healthy because of this. But concerning your other question, it will be the year 2002 before a genetic attempt will officially become known, with which plant and animal genes will be brought together. About this, we have acquired probability calculations, which show that the whole thing will report itself in Japan, in the sense that the genes of spinach plants will be transferred into pigs. Nevertheless, this will not be the first case, for the same and similar things will already happen prior to this in different countries of the earth from their scientists, as a result of their research. It's just that the world public will learn almost nothing about this, like also not about the cloning attempts regarding humans and animals. Even in the current time, many series of experiments like these are already running in scientific laboratories around the world. It's just that these are concealed, and with full justification, When one considers the unreasonable and irresponsible opponents of genes and thus inhibitors of progress who, out of complete lack of understanding, and often with a sectarian bent, seek to restrain the development, whereby all dishonest means are justified to them, and this will also remain so in the new millennium, at least in the first 2 decades.
Idiotic, especially when one considers that the progress cannot be stopped, not even when lunatics rant against it. But so it has always been on the earth, for there have always been pathological idiots who did not want to allow the progress, who braced themselves against it, and with this, often caused much disaster, through which many human beings often lost their lives, who may have been saved if that which was progressive had been allowed, especially with regard to medicine and food preparation, etc.
That is of correctness. But consider that.
Foolishness always first precedes reason.
I wanted to say that, yes. But how do you know this aphorism? It is well known to us from traditions.
From Enoch. I know.
Then did either Simyase or Ptah report this to you, or perhaps Svath or Asket?
Neither.
That I do not understand.
It is not important now. One day, though, you will understand it. Let us talk about something else. Guido and I were talking about the prehistoric human beings, respectively the Stone Age humans, and there, the question arose as to when these had actually come so far that they banded together in larger groups, and when these or their descendants built the first smaller and larger settlements, smaller or larger kraals, a rural village, typically consisting of huts surrounded by a stockade or hamlets, etc. In addition, we also came to speak of the first real prehistoric men, if one can actually designate the most distant forefathers of the Earth humans as such. Here, the question then, is how large they actually were, and whether they were already walking upright. Also, we came to the first, respectively the remaining and subsequent animals, specifically speaking of the mammals that occupied the Earth after the extinction of the dinosaurs. The real interest was with the predators and the horses and even the large mammals and so on. What is also of interest to us is when the Earth's climate basically began to stabilize itself. Since these things also belong to one of your specialties, I guess that you can certainly tell us something about it.
The Earth's climate began to stabilize itself around 35 million years ago. And if I should provide some information about mammals and also predators, which appeared about 65 million years ago after the Great Catastrophe, then I must speak of the times of the Eocene and Oligocene. As you know, the impact of a space projectile took place on the Earth about 65 million years ago, by what means all major life forms were killed and destroyed. Only small creatures were able to survive, which only weighed up to 10 or 12 kilograms at most. The first human forms, which can already be very well designated in their origin as human beings, emerged around 49 million years ago. Nevertheless, their appearance was not human, but rather in the form that the Earth human knows of the early hominid, due to his conceptions, because the first human forms still had nothing comparable with these. In fact, these beings were only about 80 centimeters large, and they partially moved half upright on their legs, and their excessively long arms partially clambered around in the trees. The development of these beings lasted for a very long time, with the most diverse species following from it, which developed into actually recognizable humans in their first species, even the early hominids. As the Earth human imagines them in their early stages, around 8.5 million years ago, while other species of the same genus appeared 4.5 and 6.5 million years ago. There were precursors to these species, but already 12.6 and 16.7 million years ago. From the more distant descendants of all these human forms, who appeared in various places on the earth, such as in Africa, Australia, Japan, China, America, South America, and in Europe, etc., as you now call these areas, there were already early accumulations of dwellings, settlements, as you say, in which whole kinships gathered together. Such sites are known to us on Earth, and they exhibit an age of 736,000 and of 801,000, 970,000, and 200,000 years. Even after the dinosaurs, there were naturally predators that could have competed with the Tyrannosaurus rex, for example. There was, for example, the family of hyenodonts, but these are not the ancestors of today's hyenas, yet they were aggressive, powerful predators whose most distant, evolutionarily altered descendants are the moles. A hyenodont reached a size of 170 to 180 centimeters, had a set of razor-sharp teeth, and especially the molars were razor-sharp grinding tools with which even the thickest bones of victims could be easily crushed for digestion. The primitive genetic blueprint of these great predators has been preserved to this day in the mole, whose incisors come from the same evolutionary line as those of the hyenodonts. So today's mole is really nothing other than a predator, albeit a small predator that only eats worms, beetles, larvae, and so on. Hyenodonts, like the mole also is, were rogues. Hyenodonts were ruthless predators, but there were others that even surpassed these, namely the entelodonts, to which the endless savannas and hardwood forests offered abundant hunting grounds. These were actually the most powerful predators that lived at the same time with the hyenodonts, which disappeared even before the entelodonts. The entelodonts reached more than 2 meters in size and weighed more than 1,000 kilograms. These animals were extremely aggressive and exhibited an actual pre-kinship to today's wild boars living on the earth. They were omnivores and had no enemies except their own kind. Rogues, like the hyenodonts, met one another as a result of their distinct sense of smell, like also the hyenodonts, when other animals were seized or when cadavers showed them the way. This led to serious fights with their equals, which were frequently associated with severe and bone-shattering injuries, and which also often ended with subsequent death. It goes without saying that these powerful, great predators had no other natural enemies, and thus were the actual rulers over all life forms at that time. Their only enemies were their own members of the same species. If they encountered each other, then they mutually attacked and maltreated themselves with their up to 1 meter long jaws, which were fitted with razor-sharp teeth. But at another time, there was also the Androsacus, also an extremely aggressive predator that weighed well over a ton, and that was the earliest ancestor of today's sheep, and also probably the largest predator that lived on the earth after the time of the dinosaurs. Nevertheless, this was not the largest animal, for that was the Indricotherium, which exhibited a size of over 7 meters and a weight of up to 17 tons. This animal at that time was the real first prototype from which developed the rhinoceros that is well known to you. The most powerful and most unusual mammal appeared on the earth a little more than 2 million years ago, the Megatherium. This was a giant sloth that walked upright on its hind legs and ate leaves. Unlike today's sloths that live in trees and that are very slow and ponderous, the Megatherium was too immense and too heavy to be able to climb trees, like also the giant rodent that was the size of a modern cow, which lived 6 to 10 million years ago. Megatherium was as large as a medium-sized elephant, weighing over 4,000 kilograms and measuring 6 meters, Only a few thousand years ago, this giant sloth lived in North and South America, but it was hunted by humans for its great-tasting meat until it was wiped out. As this also happened with the mammoth, which was also largely eliminated by the humans at that time, while the remaining animals found their end through climatic upheavals and natural disasters. And since I speak now of the mammoth, you will surely ask about the elephants, respectively for their actual original forefathers. This was the Neuraterium, which also lived millions of years ago, and which developed, over a very long evolutionary process, into what you now know as the elephant.
You forgot the horse. And how large, then, was the hyenodont?
I have in fact forgotten this. But first, the hyenodont. This was about as large as a current rhinoceros. The forefathers of horses were very small and only had a size of just less than 30 centimeters. Then, from these, the Chalicotherium developed at a later time, which was more than 3 meters in size and which had a short snout like an anteater, as well as a long neck. Therefore, with a little imagination, it could be compared to a giraffe.
Thank you for your remarks. Then now a question about the so-called Roswell case. Did a UFO actually crash there? Even though you have already confirmed this once, there are still some things that remain unclear, even with regard to the UFO crew, concerning which you said that they were androids. So, what were the occupants really? And from where did the aliens come?
The Roswell case is a reality because the UFO crash actually took place there. But this is denied up to the present day and will continue to be denied in the distant future by the American military and secret services, as well as by all government agencies, namely with flimsy, changing, stupid, and ridiculous excuses that will only surely testify to the fact that everything actually happened. With the crashed object, it concerned a beamship from the reticulum systems. The crew did not consist of natural human life forms, but of human androids of a bioorganic nature, which means that they were artificial human androids, which the U.S. Army also got a hold of, some living and some dead, and these were secretly kept in secret stations. With the bioorganic androids, it concerned effective artificial life forms, so not robots or the like, but independently thinking beings, in every way self-capable of making decisions, made out of living material and living organs, bred in accordance with the human beings who are located in the reticulum systems. In Earth-human terms, these bioorganic androids bred by the reticulum human beings are actual life forms, and as such, they are respected by the reticulum people and are also appreciated and treated, for the androids are indeed artificial human beings. As such, they stand under the command of the real humans of the reticulum systems, on whose behalf they also carry out excursions, etc., to foreign star systems and planetary systems. And such artificial human forms were associated with the crash, as I already explained. The intelligence of these android beings stems from a bioorganic consciousness of an artificial form, which is just as capable of development as the consciousness of the normal, natural person. Therefore, it can also be creative and inventive. The type of consciousness is designed uniformly and collectively in each android, which means that all of the androids have a uniform consciousness form, and so they are collectively like-minded, and thus they have a collective form of telepathic communication. The form of consciousness of these artificial life forms is built on an artificial consciousness, which does not correspond to an actual personality, but rather to an artificial form, which can think quite independently, act and decide, as well as develop itself further, but which is not arranged into conscious evolution, but only functions in a conscious instinct-based manner. This means that there is, therefore, probably a capacity for the development of the consciousness form, whereby ideas are created and thought processes can take place, which are creative, inventive, and progressive, and thus capable of being developed. But all of this just deals with conscious instinct-based matters and has nothing to do with conscious evolution. In any event, the form of consciousness of these bioorganic androids is an artificial organic element, which has no inherent creational spirit form. The form of consciousness of the androids is formed in such a wise that it has a certain independence, in spite of the collectivity, whereby a degree of individuality is given, which cannot be compared, however, to an actual personality in a consciousness-based sense. Nevertheless, it has its own individuality, which may seem like a contradiction to the Earth person, because they cannot understand these things in the tiniest part of their mind, and still cannot make any conceptions of this. He or she will only gain these conceptions and the understanding as well as the knowledge relating to such android beings in the distant future. The bioorganic androids of the reticulum human beings contain an authoritative programming in their artificial consciousness, which prevents that the artificial beings could ever rise over their designers, respectively their creators, but the time of their lives is limited to 300 years of devoted servitude to these. Nevertheless, they are entirely free and can in every way decide as to what responsibilities they undertake, exercise, or decline, and thus whether they want to focus on a task or not. So they are in no way subject to compulsion by their creators. In the kind and wise in which they are biologically created, they are incapable of performing sexual acts and also of reproducing themselves. Their own and appropriate kind of consciousness is contained in their artificial brains, and as I already mentioned, the artificial bioorganic consciousness does not contain a creational spirit form, which would drive and animate this by its own energies. Animation is provided by the artificial brain, which is constructed in such a form that it can absorb and use the cosmic electromagnetic life energies, so that the existence of life is guaranteed. It is this cosmic energy by which the artificial life forms are animated and also made alive. All this, however, could not be recognized by all the doctors, surgeons, and pathologists, etc., in the American secret stations where the crashed android beings were taken. But how could they, since their knowledge relating to this was not in place yet? In fact, it will still take many centuries and even several millennia before the terrestrial scientists arrive at the possibility of creating such beings like the bioorganic androids. Therefore, these beings will remain an unsolvable mystery to them for a very long time, as it is also the case for them with regard to the crashed beings in Roswell.
Now that was really detailed. Thank you for your explanations. But one thing still interests me. With you, I have also seen androids. So artificial life forms that can think and act independently. Are these the same as the android beings of Reticulum?
On the whole, yes. Only the appearance of our androids is different in nature, for they are created after our likenesses, while the Reticulum androids resemble their creators, who are, in spite of their high technology and various sciences, still very unknowing in terms of really spiritual and creational interests, yet still arranged into a high and liberal culture with expressed human rights. Nevertheless, our directives forbid us from maintaining deliberate physical or telepathic contact with them.
So you have told me once before. Thus, there is nothing more to be said. But now, a question that concerns the eruption of the Vesuvius volcano in Italy. On the 24th-25th of August, AD 79, which destroyed the cities of Herculaneum, Pompeii, and Stabia, by which many human beings lost their lives. Then, there were greater eruptions again in 1906 and in 1944, even though everything went off lightly. We did indeed already talk about this during the last conversation. You also mentioned a number to me regarding the human beings who lost their lives. And last of all, you then told me that you could be mistaken and thus would have to check to see how many there actually were. Have you now investigated this, and what had actually happened at that time?
In the catastrophe, 18,176 human beings were killed. The eruption of Vesuvius produced 6 pyroclastic flows, respectively clouds, which raced at a tremendous speed down the mountain and across the country, and which suffocated all life beneath them. In particular, it was the 4th pyroclastic flow that wiped out so many human lives, while the 5th and 6th just did the remaining.
18,976 human beings. Monstrosity. Was that the whole population?
No, at that time, 25,411 human beings lived in those areas that were destroyed by the volcanic eruption.
Then there were still about 4/5 who lost their lives.
That is of correctness.
What is a pyroclastic flow?
It is a rapidly spreading cloud of hot ash, dust, and air.
Aha. Then the human beings suffocated and burned when the pyroclastic flows swept over them, destroying everything under themselves.
That is once again of correctness.
Good. Since we are already at it, what was the reason for the destruction of Petra? I mean Petra, the current ruined site with the rock necropolis in southern Jordan. Petra was the residence of the Nabatean king until the establishment of the Roman province of Arabia Petraea in the year AD 106 by Trajan. Petra was also a commercial center in the caravan traffic between Syria and southern Arabia. The city was abandoned after its conquest by the Arabs in the years 629–632. To my knowledge, it was not until 1812 that the city of Petra was discovered again.
The discovery was made by a certain Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, who was born in 1784 and who already died at the age of only 33 years in 1817.
It was not a discovery but a rediscovery. In 1829, so 12 years after Burckhardt's death, the first excavations were made in Petra. I myself can remember the very ornate facades of the multi-story grave facilities worked into the rock cliffs.
I understand. You were in Jordan for a long time and, among other places, also in Petra. I know the grave facilities. Particularly impressive to me, for example, was Ed Deer, the so-called monastery that dates from the 2nd century AD.
I remember. It exhibits a very peculiar mixture of Roman Hellenistic facade architecture and temple architecture, which are connected with the local grave-building traditions. But what now was the reason for the destruction of Petra?
The destruction traces back to a massive earthquake. But not only was Petra destroyed by this, but also many other places around the current Gulf of Aqaba and around the Red Sea. Also, the earth opened up, out of which kilometer-high chunks of sulfur were hurled, which were distributed over the vast country.
Aha. And since we are already talking about down there, what was it with Sodom and Gomorrah? What actually happened there? How were these two cities destroyed?
Several factors are to be mentioned. On the one hand, a meteorite fell to the earth and exploded high over the area of the two cities, which would now actually be designated as larger villages. This led to devastating destruction of both cities, triggering a massive earthquake, by which the earth was torn open, like in Petra, and by underground volcanic activity. Small and larger chunks of sulfur were flung high and across the country, which also naturally caused much disaster, and by this, as also by the exploding meteorite, many human beings were killed. The remaining part of the total destruction was caused by the megalomaniac and crazy god of the Hebrews, an extraterrestrial who had his headquarters deep under the Pyramid of Giza. His punishment for the disobedience of the population of Sodom and Gomorrah against his commands was that he let 2 small atom bombs ignite over the 2 cities, which finally leveled everything to the ground, killing all humans and animals.
Can you tell me, as a doctor and medical scientist, how the preferences for flavors and thus for certain foods and drinks basically develop in humans?
The flavor preference of human beings for certain foods and drinks develops, in principle, in the womb of the mother during pregnancy, which means that what the mother eats and drinks is decisive, and in particular, sweet and good, spicy food and drinks are of special importance. However, if there is an excess of certain flavors, which are received via the food or the drinks of the mother, and passed on to the growing child in her womb, then an aversion to these particular flavors may very well arise, as this can also be the case if the mother does not take in certain flavors of food during pregnancy, and the child is first confronted with such substances after birth.
Then in some circumstances, growing children can become addicted, for example, to alcohol, medicines, or drugs already in the womb during pregnancy?
That is of correctness.
Aha! Then another question. What actually causes ice ages?
Ice ages result from climatic variations due to fluctuations in Earth's orbit around the Sun.
You said that along with the fact that humans have contributed to the disappearance of the mammoths from the Earth, in the end, also climate changes were responsible for this.
That's right. Humans very well eradicated the mammoth as far as possible, but the final extinction was caused by climate changes.
The mammoth disappeared, yes, about 10,000 years ago.
That only partially represents the truth because the last of these animals still lived 3,500 years ago on an island to the far north of today's Soviet Union. However, it is true that about 10,000 years ago, mammoths were very strongly reduced by humans who hunted them very much for their meat, hides, and bones. The meat was used as tasty food, while the hides and the bones found use for the building of huts.
Oh, so that's how it was. But tell me, what do you think of the developmental aid that is operated on the Earth for the underdeveloped third world countries?
This is a false activity of the Earth humans that is incomprehensible to us, because it goes against all rules of the self-development of peoples, but also of the dignity of all human beings, from whom all possibilities of self-development, self-initiative, and self-progression are irrevocably taken as a result of such an irrational and irresponsible intervention. The earthly developmental strategy, respectively that of the developmental aid organizations and their supporters and implementers, regarding the developmental aid for the underdeveloped, respectively third world countries, is absolutely wrong because this irresponsible intervention in their affairs creates tremendous damage. As a result of this wrong aid, intervention is made in every form and in every branch of the developmental structure of the underdeveloped countries, which means that these countries and their human beings become dependent in every relation on the developmental aid and on the goods given to them by the advanced industrialized nations, as well as on all of their achievements, whereby they completely lose their independence. Thus they lose their freedom, as well as the will for their own natural development. Therefore, they cannot make any more progress of their own. On the other hand, directives that are to be strictly followed would have to exist, which prohibit such developmental interventions that are usually carried out by effeminate, overhumanized, and false humane human beings of wealthy countries, as well as by adventurers. Developmental aid, as it is practiced on the earth by the wealthy countries and human beings, is not only destructive, but also inhumane. For through this, the self-initiative of the human beings of underdeveloped countries is inhibited and made impossible. This is quite apart from the fact that the wealthy industrialized nations and their development supporters are, as a rule, only out for profit, namely in the form that the developmental aid is merely intended to exploit the resources of the developing countries, etc. Overall, developmental aid, in the form that is operated by the Earth human, is destructive, inhumane, as well as progress-hindering for those whom the irrational and irresponsible aid is given. For third world countries and their human beings, the advanced achievements of the higher cultures are not understandable. They are not progressive for them and are not beneficial. Therefore, they also cannot learn anything from it, because they lack the whole career-related development and the associated insights and necessary understanding. The whole development of learning is stifled by the developmental aid. Hence, no real progress can be made, but only a dependence on the goods and products that are made available by the developmental aid workers and their advocates and organizations. Thus, a real development cannot result, but precisely this is necessary if the human being wants to make headway and wants to form his or her progress from out of their own responsibility and self-initiative. This is prevented, however, by the irresponsible developmental aid, at least for the countries and all their human beings who become blinded by the incorrect aid. If there are a few clever ones from these countries and human beings who are exceptions, then this still does not justify intervening developmentally and making whole countries and their human beings dependent on the highly developed industrialized states and inhibiting their self-development and initiative. These are some reasons why our directives prohibit such direct interventions in any human cultures. If these are lower than our own evolutionary state in terms of consciousness development, as well as with respect to medical, technological, and overall scientific development. And indeed, this refers to the overall development of all areas and sciences and, thus, not just to individual interests.
That is clear and plain. But now, I would like to direct you specifically towards the future. You promised me that you would bring me material from the Prophecies of Enoch for the third millennium, or that you would give me various prophecies.
Of course, I will keep my promise. But before I give you a clear account of the Prophecies of Enoch, I would like to point out that prophecies are always changeable and can be changed for the better if human beings make positive changes in their thoughts, feelings, and actions, leading to that which is better and positively progressive. Prophecies always rest upon specific causes. These again result in certain effects, whereby these effects can be changed at any time if only the preceding causes are changed in their form. Therefore, it is possible that negative or evil prophecies do not have to be fulfilled if the preceding causes will be purposely changed in a manner that positivity and good develop out of them instead of negativity and evil. However, this does not apply to predictions, as these rest upon events that cannot be changed, are inevitable, and surely and definitely will occur in the future. Predictions rest upon a preview and thus on a direct viewing of the future, and have to do with neither prophecy nor with a calculation of probability. So when I make a portion of Enoch's prophecies for the third millennium known to you, it does not mean that they have to be fulfilled, because the prerequisite of fulfillment in each case would be that the already existing causes continue to exist as also continue to be created in the future, so that a fulfillment of the prophecies can come to pass. Thus, The possibility always exists, always provided that the human being of the earth becomes reasonable, that through a reasonable change of thinking, as well as through a reasonable development in feeling and an equally reasonable conduct, everything changes for the good, better, and positive, whereby the prophecies do not have to fulfill themselves. However, if this transformation does not occur, a very evil, wicked, and negative time lies ahead for the earth and its entire population in the coming new millennium.
Since the Second World War, the thoughts, feelings, and actions of the human being of the earth have changed much towards the positive and good. But all that achieved is not enough in my opinion, as the great transformation towards the better has not been achieved yet, neither by the mighty of this world, nor all of humankind of the earth itself. In the years gone by, you have made many predictions and calculations of probability, as well as mentioned prophetic facts concerning the economic, military, and political situation on Earth, whereby I was requested to spread this information, which I indeed have done. Governments and newspapers, radio stations, as well as TV stations, and many private persons worldwide were informed by me. But the entire effort did not achieve anything, because up till now humankind has carried on in the old manner, and has paid no attention whatsoever to prophecies, predictions, and calculations of probability. And the same will most likely be the case in the future, when I receive permission from you in the coming time to spread the prophecies of Enoch for the third millennium. But nevertheless, I feel that Enoch's message for the future must be made known and distributed, because somehow it may yet bear fruit.
You apparently never give up hope. Your optimism is honorable and deserves to be heard by human beings. But the manner in which things have been going throughout this century, there is not too much hope that the human beings of the earth will come to their senses and heed your words. This will then be the case only when the prophecies prove to be true, or, even worse, have already come to pass. Probably only then will the time come when the defamations against you will end in regard to your contacts with us, although they will long continue to be vehemently disputed by your enemies, as well as by pathological know-it-alls and critics who dismiss them as swindle, lies, and fraud. The full truth about our contacts with you will be proven in the distant future, and then humankind will accept our help, which we offer through you, even when they erroneously assume we come from the seven-star system known to the Earth humans as the Seven Stars, Seven Sisters, Pleiades.
Simyase and Ptah already explained this to me. But tell us now what the new millennium will bring to human beings of the earth and the planet Earth according to the prophecies of Enoch.
I will do that in a moment, but I would like to explain before beginning that I am not authorized to give an exact indication of years in an official manner.
Understood, but that is certainly a good thing. But I would be grateful to you if you could present the prophecies in a modern, somewhat understandable language, for the better understanding of the human beings. The old manner of writing and speaking of Enoch might be incomprehensible to most of today's Earth humans. This also means that a straightforward language and presentation is desirable, precisely, that the prophecies should not be given in riddles and mysteries. For if I have to publish everything, then open, explanatory, and unencrypted prophecies should be of value, because I think that only understandable prophecies can be of use. Since through encryption, the interest of the human beings fades, for they can understand precisely nothing. My experience proves to me that human beings are much more responsive, and will strive for a matter in more detail and with more interest if something is clearly and distinctly explained to them. Although it is true that through the encryptions of prophecies, etc., some anxiety is reduced, this will only become greater as less is understood, for then wild fantasies begin to act and to agitate, by which means hellish anxieties and hellish pictures emerge.
Your words are of correctness. Thus, I will offer Enoch's prophecies in an understandable form. So listen, then, If the human being of the earth continues to live in the same style as they have done up to now, forming their thoughts and feelings in the same manner, indulging in the same actions as they have done hitherto, then the words of the prophecies of Enoch could not be any clearer. The point in time at which these prophecies will begin to be fulfilled will be when a pope will no longer reside in Rome. All of Europe will then fall victim to a terrible punishment by evil powers. The Christian religion will collapse, and the churches and monasteries will end up in ruins and ashes. Monstrous forces will be created by science and will be released by the military forces and armies as well as by terrorists, causing great destruction. Millions and even billions of human beings will be killed by acts of terrorism, by wars and civil wars. And finally, in some parts of the world, every third human being, and in other places, every fourth human being, will lose his or her life. The nations of the East will rise against the nations of the West against the East. Many deaths will be inflicted upon the human beings by fighter and bomber aircraft, and bombs and rockets will destroy and annihilate smaller and larger villages and cities. The human beings will be completely powerless against all this, and will live through 888 days of hell on earth, suffering hunger and plagues, which will claim even more lives than the war itself. The time will be severe as never before experienced on the earth. Ultimately, nothing can be bought or sold any longer. All provisions will be rationed, and if a human being steals even a small piece of bread, he or she will have to pay for it with their life. Many waters will mix with human blood and turn red, as once in the past the Nile in Egypt turned red with blood. And it will be that the fanatics of Islam will rise up against the countries of Europe, and all will shake and quiver. Everything in the West will be destroyed, England will be conquered and thrown down to the lowest level of misery. And the fanatics and warriors of Islam will retain their power for a long time. However, not only Europe will be affected, but ultimately all the countries and human beings of the earth, as the great horror expands to a war that will encompass the entire world. After the turn of the millennium, the papacy will exist for only a short period. Pope John Paul II is the third from last in this position. After him, only one additional pontificate will follow. Then a Pontifex Maximus follows, who will be known as Petrus Romanus. Under his religious rule, the end of the Catholic Church will come, a total collapse becoming inevitable. That will be the beginning of the worst catastrophe that will ever have befallen the human beings and the earth. Many Catholic clerics, priests, bishops, cardinals, and many others will be killed, and their blood will flow in streams. But also the reformed version of Christianity will become just as infinitely small, as does Catholicism. Due to the fault of scientists, enormous power will be seized by the power-hungry and their military, their warriors and terrorists, and power will be seized as well through laser weapons of many types, but also via atomic, chemical, and biological weapons. Also concerning genetic technology, enormous misuse will occur, because this will be unrestrainedly exploited for the purposes of war. Not lastly due to the cloning of human beings for warring purposes, as this was practiced in ancient times with the descendants of Enoch in the regions of Sirius. However, this will not be all of the horrors, as in addition to the genetic technology and the chemical weapons, far worse and more dangerous and more deadly weapons of mass destruction will be produced and will be used. The irresponsible politicians will unscrupulously exercise their power, assisted by scientists and obedient military forces serving them, who together hold a deadly scepter and will create clone-like beings, which will be bred in a total lack of conscience and will be scientifically manipulated to become killer machines. Division by division and devoid of any feelings, they will destroy, murder, and annihilate everything. The USA will set out against the Eastern countries ahead of all other financial states, and simultaneously she will have to defend herself against the Eastern intruders. In all, America will play the most decisive role. When in the guise to strive for peace and to fight against terrorism, she invades many countries of the earth, bombs and destroys everything, and brings thousand-fold deaths to the populations. The military politics of the USA will likewise know no limits, as neither will their economic and other political institutions, which will be focused on building and operating a world police force, as it is the case already for a long time. But that will not be enough, because under the guise of a so-called peaceful globalization, American politics will strive for absolute world domination of economic form. And this will point towards the possibility that a third world war could develop from it, if the human beings as a whole will not finally become bearers of rationality and undertake the necessary steps against the insane machinations of their governments and military powers, as well as their secret services, and call a halt to the power of the irresponsible who have forsaken their responsibility in all areas. If this does not happen, many small and great nations will lose their independence and their cultural identity and will be beaten down, because the USA will gain predominance over them and bring them down under her rule with evil gavolt. And at first, many countries will howl with the wolves of the US, partially due to fear of American aggressions and sanctions, as will be the case with many irresponsible ones in Switzerland and Germany, but also of other countries. In part, others will join in because they will be forced somehow to do so, or will be misled by irresponsible promoters of American propaganda. Finally, many Asian, African, and European states will rise up against the American hegemony. Once they recognize that the United States of America is only taking advantage of them for purposes of war, conquest, and exploitation. In this manner, many countries will become puppet states of America before rationality and cognition will emerge in the responsible ones of governments and in many of the population, resulting in a turning away from the USA. However, the Great War will hardly be avoidable, because the human beings of the earth will probably not accept the directions towards the better, therewith towards true love, true freedom, and real peace, striving instead only towards wealth, pleasure, and riches, and for all manner of material values and unrestricted power. Thus, huge and deadly formations of tanks will roll across the countries while fighter planes and rockets sweep through the air and bring death, ruin, destruction, and annihilation to countries and human beings. And the bad time will come, during which also the militaries and armies will cause out of control great wild and evil devastations and unimaginable massacres of the human beings who will be forced to watch the wild activities powerlessly. Your and our warnings will be cast into the wind by the majority of Earth humanity. Even though quite a bit could still be saved and the very worst could be prevented if your and our words of love, peace, freedom, and wisdom would be acted upon. But even that, unfortunately, is doubtful. If the Third World War will actually happen, as calculations and observations appear to indicate to be probable now and also during the approaching few decades, then, as now, the civilian population will above all have to bear the brunt of the enormous suffering in tremendous numbers in this entire catastrophe, and, last but not least, the fault of the irresponsible scientists who by cloning will create human machines for military purposes, devoid of conscience and feelings, and will create immensely deadly and all-annihilating computer-like weapons. At the same time, the danger could become reality that the human combat machines, the military clones, will gain their independence and under their own management will bring death, devastation, destruction, and annihilation to the human beings of the Earth and to the planet. The entire planet will become an arena of unparalleled suffering, which will never have existed before on the Earth up to that time. The cruel happenings will last about 888 days and cause civilization to collapse. Yet, the terrible scenario will continue, and epidemics and various diseases as well as enormous famine will be spread among the human beings, while the economy of the world will totally collapse, and there will be no possibility to produce any goods. Needless to say, all foods and medications, etc., will be rationed, and anyone who lays their hands on these goods will be put to death. The insanity of war will extend not only across the land, but the disaster will equally be spread to the oceans, into the atmosphere, even into outer space. But there will also be settlements under the ocean that will be developed in the course of the future, and these will be attacked and destroyed, claiming the lives of many thousands of human beings. However, a certain maelstrom of destruction will also originate from the undersea facilities, because in the cities at the bottom of the ocean, groups of submarine pirates will be formed which will burst upwards from the depths of the ocean and will become involved in destructive actions of combat with naval units on the surface. And at this time, the possibility could become reality that extraterrestrial forces intervene against the Western industrialized countries, because these will be responsible for the extreme and enormous disaster of the coming evil times. These extraterrestrial forces will give up their anonymity and their state of secrecy, and will assist those who are being terrorized by the irresponsibly acting Western countries, should this possibility become reality. In addition, apocalyptic natural catastrophes will occur which will cause all of Europe to shake and tremble, but Europe will continue to exist, even after having suffered enormous destruction. Far in the West, it will be different. The United States of America will be a country of total destruction. The cause for this will be manifold. With her global conflicts, which are continuously instigated by her, and which will continue far into the future, America is creating enormous hatred against her worldwide in many countries. As a result, America will experience enormous catastrophes, which will reach proportions barely imaginable to the human beings of the Earth. The destruction of the WTC, that is to say the World Trade Center, by terrorists will only be the beginning. Yet all the apocalyptic events will not only be brought about due to the use of unbelievably deadly and destructive weapons, such as chemical, laser, and others, and by cloned murder machines. But in addition to this, the Earth and nature, maltreated to the deepest depths by the irresponsible human beings of Earth, will rise up and cause destruction and bring death onto the Earth. Enormous firestorms and gigantic hurricanes will sweep over the USA, bringing devastation, destruction, and annihilation as will never have happened before in living memory. Not only will America, but also all other Western industrial countries, which still live at the beginning of the new millennium in the delusion that they could dominate and rule over underdeveloped nations. That is to say, third world countries not only soon lose influence over these, but must defend themselves against them. According to the prophecies of Enoch, the truth about industrialized countries is that they only seem to appear to be true civilizations, but in fact they are not, because more and more, at the end of the 20th century and at the beginning of the third millennium, they will disregard all true love, true freedom, and true wisdom, as well as true peace, along with all values of humaneness, and of being true humans. But not even all the terrible happenings will hinder the USA in continuing to proceed with its actions against all countries. Even when the North American continent will be stricken by the most terrible catastrophe which has ever been recorded, evil military powers will wreak havoc with computerized and nuclear, biological and chemical weapons, whereby it will also happen that computerized weapons become independent and cannot be controlled any longer by human beings. Overall, this is the most important part of Enoch's prophecies.
But there is still more to explain if I may ask you for it. At least, that is what you told me.
You are untiring, so I will point out a few more important facts of the prophecies. As of now, new epidemics have spread among the human beings of the earth. However, as Enoch prophesied, quite a number of further epidemics will follow. Not only AIDS will occur worldwide in the 1990s, but also epidemics such as the so-called mad cow disease, that is to say BSE, out of which different strains of Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome will develop, lasting well into the new millennium. Also, an epidemic known as Ebola will cause many deaths, as well as other unknown epidemics and diseases which will sporadically arise in epidemic proportions and will be new to the human being, causing great concern. However, most of the evil will be brought about by politics. France and Spain become involved with each other in armed conflicts, and even before World War III will have broken out. Yet France will not only engage in armed conflicts with Spain, for within her great unrests will arise, leading to upheavals and civil war, or as in Russia and Sweden, great unrest will arise there in its own country as well, bringing about upheavals and civil war. Especially in France and Sweden, machinations as well as dictatorial regulations of the European Union will cause much unrest and many uprisings. But also crimes committed by gangs and organized criminal elements in these countries will cause unavoidable civil wars. In addition, significant tensions will arise between the native citizens and immigrants from foreign countries, who, as a rule, also observe religious beliefs different from those of the native populace. And in the end, this will lead to severe conflicts. Hatred against strangers, foreigners, and human beings of different religious beliefs will be the order of the day, as well as the rise of neo-Nazism, terrorism, and right-wing extremism. Conditions similar to civil war will be in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland and claim many lives. The Soviet Union will be dissolved in this decade or at the latest, by the beginning of the next. The man decisive for this action will be Mikhail Gorbachev. But this will not lead to rest, because the new Russia will continue its long-standing conflict with China over Inner Mongolia, with the result that Russia will lose a portion of this territory to China. And China becomes dangerous, especially to India, as also at this time China maintains uneasy relations with her. China will attack India, and if biological weapons are used, around 30 million human beings will be killed in the area of and around New Delhi alone. However, this will not be the end yet, because the effect of biological bombs and missiles, etc., that will be used cannot be controlled in their outcomes at that time, and terrible epidemics, unknown up to that point in time, will arise and will spread quickly to many areas. Also, Pakistan will allow herself to be misled to instigate a war against India, which will be especially dangerous in view of the fact that both countries are developing atomic weapons. Yet Russia will not rest and will attack Scandinavia, and in doing so will embroil all of Europe. And months before that, a terrible tornado will have swept across northern Europe, causing great devastation and destruction. it must still be stated that the Russian attack will occur during the summer, in fact, starting from Arkhangelsk. Denmark will not be dragged into the war due to the insignificance of this country. Yet Russia will not be satisfied with this action of war, as her will for expansion will be immense. And consequently, Russia will launch a military attack against Iran and Turkey and will conquer these two countries in bloody fighting, causing enormous destruction. Anchored in the Russian will to expand will also be the will of theirs to annex the oil deposits in the Middle East, as well as to get into the direct area of southeastern Europe, which is why they are also advancing into the Balkans and mercilessly and devastatingly beating the countries there in huge battles, with many deaths and destruction. This will be at the time that tremendous natural disasters will hit Italy and its human beings, causing severe hardship. But this will also be at the time when Vesuvius could become active again and could spread tremendous havoc. At the same time, a war will shake Italy and claim many human lives, as well as cause great destruction. Destruction of war will also descend on the northern countries, as strong military forces will invade them from the east and will pillage and murder as well as use bombs and missiles, like hail coming down, and hitherto unknown weapons of laser and computer-controlled types, which will destroy and annihilate everything, whereby the first target will be Hungary, and after that will follow Austria and northern Italy. Switzerland will also be severely affected, but will not be the actual target. This will be France and Spain. However, the main objective of the aggressors will be to bring all of Europe under their military control, and for that purpose, France will be selected to be the headquarters. France will not only be invaded by the aggressors from the outside, but will also be conquered from within, as a result of collaborative forces and other forces. This can be envisioned as being the many foreigners of a different religion living in France at that time, and specifically Islam, which will be this force working from within. Once France has fallen, a war to conquer Spain and England will take place. Subsequently, an alliance with the forces of the aggressors will be formed, which will invade Scandinavia. For all these French-based military operations, the weapons of mass destruction stored in the arsenals of France will be used and cause evil devastation, destruction, and annihilation. The aggressors from the east will force the French army to join their military forces and lead a war of conquest against the northern countries of Europe, invading and conquering Sweden and Norway. Subsequently, these northern countries will be annexed by Russia. Military forces will also attack Finland, whereby many will be killed and an enormous destruction will be caused, after which the complete dissolution of the country will occur and the Russian forces will settle in it for a very long time. This, then, will also be the time during which the German citizenship will even fight in a civil war and at the same time attack a large army from East Germany. But the country and its population will be able to free themselves from the yoke of the aggressors again. It's just that they will still fall into the hands of the invading military Gavolt. After a certain time, then, the nations will rise up against the aggressors and intruders. Therefore, a European-wide liberation struggle will break out. At the same time, as a civil war rages in Germany, an enormously bloody revolution will break out in England, which will claim more lives than will be claimed by the civil war in Germany. And because England and Ireland have been at war for a long time already, due to the IRA and the police and military forces of England, the result will be, because this feud will continue up to that time, that this revolution will spread out to all of Ireland, especially affecting Northern Ireland. Many lives will be lost during a civil war in Wales, where differences between various parties will arise before the Third World War. Welsh and English forces will clash especially near Cymru and claim many lives and cause great destruction. But death, destruction, and annihilation will not only rage in Europe, for America will also have to endure much suffering and mourn many deaths, as well as destruction and annihilation. America and Russia will have the most terrible weapons of mass destruction at their disposal, which indeed is already the case to a certain extent today, and will clash with violent force against each other at that time of conflict, whereby Canada will also be dragged into this conflict. The source of this conflict will substantiate the Russian attack on the American state of Alaska and against Canada. This conflict will result in mass killings of human beings as well as devastating destruction, annihilation and epidemics, etc., which mankind of Earth will never have seen and experienced up to that time. Not only nuclear, biological and chemical weapons will be used en masse, but also enormously deadly systems of computer-controlled weapons that are only in the beginning stages of development today, or will be invented and constructed during the third millennium. As already mentioned, enormous natural catastrophes and rolling walls of fire and violent hurricanes will rage all across America, while, in addition, all the terrible effects of war will bring thousandfold deaths, destruction, and annihilation. America's largest cities will be absolutely destroyed, and firestorms will cause great disaster and misery. Severe earthquakes and volcanic eruptions will also belong to that time, and these will cause much suffering and misery and deaths, besides enormous destruction and devastation, as all of nature and the planet itself will rise up against the insanity of the human beings on the earth. However, tornadoes, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions will not only rage in America, but also in Europe and in the rest of the world. These activities have already begun at the present time, and also during the past decades. Only they will become increasingly more devastating in the coming time. And today, as in the future, it is largely the fault of the Earth's human beings who are destroying the entire environment, the nature, the atmosphere, the waters, and the planet's resources. And through this, a shifting of weight inside the Earth takes place, caused, for example, by the creation of gigantic lakes through damming and by creating hollow caverns due to the exploitation of petroleum and gas, etc., and thereby unnatural inner Earth movements are created, which also lead to unnatural tectonic effects and cause earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, which also in turn cause enormous climatic changes, resulting in horrendous tornadoes of devastating proportions, which in the end will set their destructive energies free on the entire world. All of this will lead to increasingly horrible floods and unusually massive snowfalls, which will advance to the southern countries and finally even to the equatorial regions, because through the insanity of human beings, the Earth has imperceptibly begun to spin as a result of the atomic bomb explosions within and on the Earth. And this will be the reason that the planet will slowly but surely enter an extraordinary spinning orbit around the Sun. While the first phase is already occurring, which causes a change in climate, leading to a new ice age. Yet the misery on Earth will continue, as two terrible civil wars will break out in America, whereby one will follow the other. Afterwards, the United States of America will break apart, and deadly hostility will prevail among her, which then leads to the division into 5 different territories. And it cannot be prevented that sectarian fanatics will play a dictatorial role. Anarchy will be the worldwide condition that will prevail and torment human beings over a long period of time, as human beings will also be tormented by the many epidemics and diseases, many of them new and unknown to human beings, and, for this reason, incurable. Due to this fact, the bodies of many human beings will slowly and miserably decay, while unbearable pain will also occur, as well as blindness and terrible respiratory problems that lead to suffocation. The consciousness of many human beings will become impaired and succumb to feeble-mindedness and insanity. And all these gruesome occurrences will be traceable to biological and chemical weapons, which are the cause of not fast, but gruesome and slow deaths. And this will also occur due to the use of ray and frequency weapons which are already being developed today. Finally, the words of Enoch may be specifically mentioned, which include that humankind of Earth, in pursuit of technology for mass destruction and greed for power, hatred, vengeance and riches, will flout all values of creation and will trample upon all values of love, wisdom, freedom and peace, as ancestors of the Enoch lineage have done before, to plunge the world into screaming misery, death, destruction, and annihilation, and into the most severe catastrophes humankind of Earth will ever have experienced.
Those are, however, still not all the prophecies of Enoch.
That is of correctness. The given explanations should suffice, however.
There, you are actually right. But tell me, what is actually going on now with what you told me about the building of the pyramids? Namely that human powers, respectively human muscle power, had accomplished the building of the pyramids. Years ago, I was told that telekinetic forces had been in play, by which means the large cubes should have been moved through the air by thought, respectively consciousness powers, which are and have always been mistakenly referred to as mental powers. But now you have said something else. How does that reconcile itself?
My recently given explanation is just as correct as that which you were given a few years ago. Both recently as well as before, you only asked for a certain explanation, but not for one that should be complete. So now, however, I will explain to you that both human muscle power, which accomplished most of the work, as well as telekinetic powers were used in the building of the pyramids. The human muscle power was used by the human beings of the Earth, who worked on the building, while the telekinetic powers were used by the foreigners from the star systems Orion and Leo, and of these foreigners, however, only a few had powerful telekinetic powers. Thus, only small works were settled in this manner.
Thus, misunderstandings arise.
Exact answers always trace back to an exact specifying of the questions.
Of course. Then a clear question. Several times I have already determined that your knowledge is very comprehensive with regard to spiritual and creational interests. To what extent do you occupy yourself therewith?
Also, nothing remains hidden to you. My efforts are directed towards acquiring the level of an Ishvish.
Oh no, and you first say that now, after we have already known each other for so long.
You never asked about it.
Well, roared Lion. You are right. Yes, because you only explain things about yourself if I ask for them. I should actually do that myself.
That you also do, yes. When I think that I must constantly strive very much if I want to learn something about you. Since you only rarely tell me something about yourself, as you also do so with the group members, I must always do my best to get to know something about you that is otherwise necessary for me.
Then we are both just sick in the same hospital, if you know what I mean.
This saying is known to me from you, yes. But now, my friend, I should say goodbye again, for I am already here for nearly too long, and I still have important things to do.
As you wish. Please greet everyone quite sincerely for me, and please convey to Simyase my best wishes. So go then, and farewell. Goodbye.
Until we meet again, my friend.
One more moment, please, my friend. As you were mentioning Enoch's prophecy, the question went through my head as to why, actually, also Switzerland will come to the checkout, respectively, will be overrun by foreign war powers. Is there a particular reason for this? As a neutral state, our country should be respected and should remain spared from acts of war.
If Switzerland would actually remain neutral, then it would also be spared from acts of war. Through many irresponsible ones of the human beings and the government, the land of peace, as it was called in the early prophecies, will lose its true neutrality despite contrary statements and promises of the irresponsible ones. The fact will be that these irresponsible ones, for which they already prepare and strive today, will form connections with the UN and NATO, as well as with the forthcoming European Union, whereby the true neutrality of Switzerland will be destroyed, and indeed, against all contrary assertions of the responsible governments and the misled population, as I already explained to you. Through the UN and NATO, Switzerland and also the citizens will be drawn into acts of war. Although the UN should be of a purely peaceful nature, that will not remain so, because it will be inevitable in the new millennium that also the UN forces will take up arms. Even though it will only be for defense in some circumstances, it still means acts of war, through which death will hold a rich harvest, even in the ranks of the UN forces. Nevertheless, that will not be everything, for the idea of creating a European Union has already arisen in various high leaders of Europe, through which the human beings who will comprise it will be greatly limited in their freedom, as well as the various provincial governments that will sell off their countries entrusted to them to this European Union, which will exhibit very strong dictatorial tendencies. Brussels and Belgium will become the governmental center for this union, and the responsible persons there will acquire tremendous compensations, which will have to be paid by the countries belonging to the Union and their populations. They will call these compensations fair remuneration, for which the citizens of all Union member countries will have to perform hard work by the sweat of their brows. Through these, the leaders of the European Union will be able to live in the lap of luxury at the expense of the citizens and will be able to laugh at the stupidity of their advocates. The rulers of the individual countries, as well as those of the European Union in Brussels, will gradually take it so far, even to the point where they will want to sue and punish their rejectors, complainants, and critics. And the doings of the European Union will ultimately be the decisive reason for the fact that from the East, military forces will invade Europe and will subjugate and destroy everything. If the entire population of Europe and their governments do not rationally work against everything so that the threatening prophecies do not fulfill themselves.
When should these connections with the planned European Union come about, then? I mean with regard to Switzerland.
The beginnings for this will already be established by the leaders of the government of Switzerland in the coming 90s, but the actual connections will not come about until the next millennium. The irrationality of both the government and the majority of the Swiss folks will, unfortunately, be more powerful than their reason. And through this, all roads will be paved for the autonomy of the government, whereby the catastrophe will ultimately break out over Switzerland if the country's citizens still do not become sensible and do not counteract the machinations that lead to slavery and war. The human beings in the European countries and, with these, also those in Switzerland, still have time to prevent everything and to turn to the better. But it is doubtful as to whether their reason will triumph and whether they will prevent the imminent evil thereby. For this is still possible during the next few years, but after this it will then become too late very quickly.
Reason is to be hoped for, but such hope will probably be pointless, I think.
As things are looking, you will probably be right. Unfortunately.
It would be right to me if you would still say a few important things, and if you would mention some aspects that are important for the Earth humans.
I can do that, yes. However, this requires that I inform someone about my extended absence. Wait a moment. Yes, it is okay. I can postpone my task.
Quetzal spoke in a language unfamiliar to me, over his communication device, with a female person who is likewise unknown to me.
What should I speak of now?
Let us hear something in the sense of what you extraterrestrials have to tell us Earth humans in general, regarding behavior and development, love, knowledge and wisdom, as well as regarding peace and truth, etc. in your kind. You are all very highly developed and extremely loving beings, who have overcome all acts of violence, and who wish that we sorry earthworms would also free ourselves from the illogical Gewalt. In this context, I think that it would be appropriate for you to say a few words.
There is a lot that can and must be addressed. And I would like to list that which I have to say as follows. 1. For the Earth humans, we wish that they, in all love and reason, tend toward bringing an end to all aggression, acts of violence and wars, as well as all criminality, all hate, all discord, every bondage, as well as any craving for vengeance and retaliation. 2. In order that correct justice and humanity, as well as true reverence for life can prevail, it is our desire that in all countries worldwide, torture as well as the death penalty be abolished, and laws are enacted where every life and the right to soundness of the body and psyche are respected and placed under legal protection. 3. We wish that a normal level of population and births be strived for on Earth, and, in this regard, effective worldwide birth control be enforced, because only through this can too excessive and overpopulation be avoided and even further privation. Criminality, hate against the fellow humans, wars, exploitation of Earth's resources to the utmost, as well as new diseases, epidemics, and misery be avoided and contained. 4. A means of food production should be strived for on Earth among all human beings, and these goods should be distributed in such a manner that the misery of hunger no longer develops and, therefore, all human beings have enough food. 5. The Earth human should no longer be destructive in all areas of science and in the cultivation of land and forests, as well as water utilization, etc., but rather be constructive and progressive. This also refers to the preservation of a healthy atmosphere and ever more threatening climatic change, with reference to that which originates through human fault. 6. Earth humans should consciously unfold in the forms of love and knowledge, as well as in true humanity, and recognize the creation-given evolution as the highest goal and meaning of life. 7. The Earth humans should utilize their sciences in such a manner that true, positive progress develops in every respect. 8. The cognition, knowledge, experience, as well as wisdom should grow within Earth humans in order to know that they are not the only human life forms in the entire universe and are, furthermore, but a fraction of the whole within the universe. 9. True peace as well as true love and freedom should finally prevail on Earth and among all human beings regardless of skin color. Race and faith without hate, revenge, jealousy, craving for retaliation, privation, misery, murder, homicide, terror, and wars. 10. It should come to an end that the countries of Earth, even the poorest and most underdeveloped among them, maintain armies that are armed to the teeth and senselessly burn away innumerable sums of money in the billions which could and should be used for the true well-being of the human beings. Thus it should finally cease that politicians and the military, as well as the most diverse organizations everywhere in the world, talk about peace and freedom, love and humanity, in order to justify tremendous financial expenditures on the one hand, and on the other hand, to snatch up even more of these funds for purposes of war and terror, and to heat up the weapons industry so that further acts of terrorism and war can be carried out with the new weapons. 11. It must finally come to an end on earth that human beings with other forms of conviction as well as different faith, skin color, and race are hated, pursued, tortured, and killed. 12. It must come to an end that umpteen thousand tons of food are criminally destroyed on a daily basis for reasons of profit or, due to low market prices, they are simply thrown into rivers, fed to livestock or left to rot away, food which would spare millions of human beings from a death by starvation, in particular women and children who are the ones bearing the most misery in this regard. 13. It must come to an end that Earth humans, as a whole, face all their enormous problems helplessly and powerlessly because all the profit-greedy, irresponsible and unscrupulous ones are able to conduct their criminal affairs unrestrainedly without being held accountable for them, as are also the governmental persons of responsibility who are incapable of administering their office within the framework of a just and appropriate leadership in order to resolve the mounting problems. 14. Most urgently, the Earth human must learn to bear their own responsibility and consciously act in a progressive manner in accordance with this. It can no longer persist that the responsibility is simply shifted onto someone or something else, because the individual is responsible for all of his or her own thinking, feelings, and actions. The individual must recognize and adhere to his or her responsibility, because only when the individual begins recognition of their responsibility and adheres to their responsibility will the next person be prompted to do the same, whereby others in turn will join in, and finally the whole of Earth's humankind will be taken up by it. 15. If the individual person has the need to actively do something to change the world, its human beings in particular, this actually is within his or her power, but only in such a manner that they be an example to their fellow human beings. Thus every person has it within him or herself to begin a change for the better, toward peace, love, freedom, progress, as well as toward knowledge and wisdom. Everyone must make a start by himself or herself and also discover the way to a free and happy life on their own. Each human being must first acquire an optimistic attitude solely for themselves, and from this will initially result the progress of expansion through which their fellow humans will be prompted and will join in. And if the human beings think consciously in this direction, then they will make the amazing discovery that all means and all hopes for a true progress exist only when they start everything by themselves. 16. The human being must recognize, discover, and experience in detail, through his or her own cognition, what their true innermost being is and how it relates to the external personality. 17. Unfortunately, the Earth humans have generally assigned top ranks or top status to political, economic, scientific, military, material, and financial values. These, however, are unvalues that bring tremendous damage through which the well-being in physical and psychological aspects is impaired, as well as the consciousness-related development of the individual and even of the whole of humankind. As a result, the true sages and philosophers have vanished, making room for the wannabes with respect to wisdom and philosophy who frequently inundate the world and humankind with horrendous nonsense that has nothing to do with reality, correctness, and conformity to laws of the spiritual energies and the creation. All of these unvalues must be removed in order to place the true sages back in their proper place in society. The opportunity must be provided for these few who are presently on earth to emerge from their hidden solitude so that they can instruct the human beings. In so doing, however, all those must be pushed into the background who spread unreasonable sectarian teachings and principles through which earth humans have been pushed away from the real truth and have been misled. 18. The earth human must learn not to solely pursue materialism and money from birth until death, and hence they should not listen just to those who have amassed political or military power or an immense fortune. And so they should neither aspire after them nor try to be like them, and devote neither their time, their work and efforts, nor their initiative and lives to them as well. If the human beings nevertheless do this, then they forfeit their evolution and thus the meaning of their existence. And if they do not lose their life in a direct manner, then they make themselves dependent on the rulers of a political, dictatorial, military, or materially wealthy form, shouting approval and support for them, and becoming those who live in appearance, illusion, instead of those who truly live are. 19. The earth human must free himself or herself from the variety of political, dictatorial, military, scientific and faith-oriented directions, as this alone guarantees, on the one hand, the discovery and following of the path of the creational truth and its laws and recommendations, as well as, on the other hand, a loving, peaceful, liberated, wise, and harmonious functioning of the individuals and the entire community of humankind. Truthfully, no movement of a political, military, economical, scientific, philosophical, and faith-oriented form should be allowed to dominate over another. However, if such domination exists, then rivalries, hate, racism, faith and political struggles, as well as discord, lack of freedom, unkindness, ignorance, and many further unvalues develop, which lead to destruction, murder, and manslaughter, in addition to warlike actions and falsehood. 20. The earth human must change toward the good and positive through their own reason and grasp of responsibility, and thereby rehabilitate themselves. Thus he or she must establish their own dimension and free themselves from their self-demeaning service toward all their shortcomings and their false hopes and desires. The earth human considers that he or she will live new lives over and over again in striving for that which is higher in accordance with the creational laws and recommendations through many new personalities in reincarnation of the spirit form and the overall consciousness block, namely in the obligation of a creational path that he or she consciously develops in every logical, good, and positive form. But this means that every person must strive for his or her advancement through every personal responsibility, and society must also make that possible for them. It is correct that each one takes the trouble to perform the required work for which they will be paid, and which will enable them to afford housing in one form or the other, as well as, in self-responsibility, to bear the cost of their food and clothing, and also for their training and education, and for all arising needs. 21. The earth human must learn to recognize and understand their true, innermost creational being, because solely through this will it be possible for them to engage their body and, above all, their material consciousness and its awakening and development. Thus he or she learns their own self-appreciation for their innermost being as well as their body and consciousness, and come to this realization by themselves. So the recognition and conscious arousal of one's own innermost being occurs through the awakening of the material consciousness, as well as true awareness of the body. These 21 important things, dear friend, should be my statements for now, which I mentioned in accordance with your wish. In another visit, I will perhaps try to continue with the statements.
My sincere thanks for your remarks. I would also like to thank you in advance that you want to address even other points in later conversations. Many thanks.
But now it must really be enough for today. Goodbye.
Take care. Goodbye, and many thanks once again.